Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to my ongoing mission to count down my Star Trek top 100, my 100 favorite episodes of the 5 Legacy Star Trek series. In this video, I will be covering numbers 17 through 11. Last week, I did 25 through 18, so check that out if you haven't already. This is part of my planned portion for August was going to be 25 through 11, and I decided to split that into 2 videos. So 25 through 18 was last week, 17 through 11 is this week. And I apologize right off the bat if there's this humming sound in the background. Hopefully it is not too bad, but it is 100 degrees where I am right now, and so I must have the air conditioning on, and I live in an apartment, so you're going to hear the air conditioning, so that's how it is. So hopefully it's not too bad, but I do need to stay cool. So before we get into it, I do want to talk about what is in the description below, because I've been very neglectful about reminding you all of what you can find down there. One thing is timestamps for each entry in this video. So if you would like to just watch number 17, you can just click on the timestamp for number 17, or if you just want to watch number 16, you can just click on the timestamp for that, etc., etc. And I'm not going to spoil what the episode is in the comments, or rather in the description. You're going to have to actually watch the video to see what the episode is. However, I will tell you what series that entry is from, but you will have to click on the timestamp to see actually what it is, or you can just watch this whole video from beginning to end. And the other thing in the description below, after you scroll down beneath that, I will give you a refresher, a reminder of everything in my top 100 up to this point, up before this start of this video. So from numbers 100 through 18, that is all listed there in this description below. So you should check out all of that. So this is my number 17 through 11. Once again, this is by my opinion and my opinion alone. You will see right off the bat that my number 17 is one that nobody else will put in their top 25, and I do not care because it is in my top 25, my top 100 at number 17. I should also note, because I talked about in my last video, how Next Generation dominates, and that is true overall, especially once we get into that top 5. In October, we'll start the top 5. You will see the domination of the Next Generation. However, in this particular video, this particular segment of my countdown, Deep Space Nine wins the day. You'll see 3 Deep Space Nine episodes in this video, as opposed to 2 for the Next Generation, 1 for TOS and 1 for Voyager. And as discussed last week's video, Enterprise is done. Enterprise did not make it past number 21, and it's not because I hate Enterprise, but I gave an explanation for that in the last video, so you should watch that. Anyways, no more rambling. Let's jump right in with my number 17.
Number 17.
All right, let us get into it with my number 17, and it comes from the original series, and it is one from the original series that is generally considered to be a classic, and yet people aren't going to have it in their original series top 10s or in their all-time top 20s of all of Star Trek the way that I do. But it's still considered a classic. I think people are more likely to put episodes like The Trouble with Tribbles above this, or Balance of Terror, or Amok Time, or Doomsday Machine. Trouble with Tribbles is not in my top 100. I did a video at some point where I talked about why that is. I'm not getting into that again. And those other 3 that I mentioned are further back on my list. So Balance of Terror, I have, I think it's the highest. I think it's like number 39 or something like that. But this one to me beats all of those, and I know I'm a little bit rare in that, and that's fine. My number 17 from the original series is the all-time classic episode, The Naked Time. And as I rambled on with all this preamble to this, if you were able to catch my little screen name over here, you may have already figured out what this episode is, because that is a great line from that episode that I will get to as I talk about this. So this episode was the fourth episode of Star Trek to be seen by human eyes, to be seen by the wide audience, and human eyes outside of the people making the show itself, but to be seen by the greater audience, the world out there. This was only the fourth episode that people saw, and I like to imagine that it is the episode that hooked a lot of people, because I know for me personally, I look at that original air date order, and if I were alive in the 60s and I watched those first three episodes and then I watched this, I am 100% confident that this would have been the episode that brought me in. Now, I, of course, watched it later, all in reruns. It was all kind of out of order. I don't remember what order I watched it in. I'm pretty sure The Naked Time was not one of the first episodes I watched. So I don't remember which one hooked me. I do remember which was the first episode I saw that's in the children shall lead, but I don't actually remember the episode that, like, I'm a Trekkie now. Maybe Mirror Mirror might have been that. I'm not sure. But I do feel that if I had watched it in this order, it would have been The Naked Time, because I view The Naked Time as the first truly quintessential Star Trek episode, like the first episode that what we think of as Star Trek. This was it. This was the first true Star Trek episode. And what I mean by that, it has all the classic elements of Star Trek. It has the intrigue. It has the tension. The stakes are high. And the crew have camaraderie and chemistry between the crew, and getting to see a true ensemble cast, which is unfortunately is something the original series did not do often enough. But whenever you see Strange New Worlds or Discovery or even Picard do it, and I think Strange New Worlds of those is the best at it, then you think of it, that's truly quintessential Star Trek, when you have that true ensemble cast coming together and working together as a crew, and you get to see a little bit from everyone. And I think that was the first time that had really happened. Now, looking at the previous three episodes to air, now I want to say this: I prefer air date order, and I know that my brother over on Enchantment of Eternity prefers to watch it and discuss it in production order, because production order actually makes sense. If you watch it in production order, there's more continuity, and the story makes more sense. The character development makes a little more sense. Whereas an air date order, like, they aired it all out of this wacky, out of order, crazy way that if you watch it in air date order, it's insane. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But to me personally, and I'm not knocking my brother, I think everybody has their own preferred way of enjoying Star Trek. And I understand why he would want to watch it in production order, or why others would want to watch it in production order, because it does make more sense. The story makes more sense. Character development makes more sense. But for me, to watch it in production order is rewriting history. Like, you're arranging it in the order it should have aired, but that's not how it aired. You're rewriting history. I prefer to go in the mind of the people the minds, I should say, of the people who were watching it as it aired in the 60s, and getting into their heads and saying, like, how did they consume this? How did they view this? I want to experience it that way. So that's why I prefer air date order. And doing so, I often wonder, like, how the fuck did people watch this show? How did this show become popular? Because the air date order is insane. And I think part of that answer is, in the 60s, shows were much more episodic. There was virtually no continuity in a lot of shows. 1 week to the next, the reset button was hit, and that was pretty commonplace in the time. So I think people were just used to it. So I think when we look at it as being really weird and wacky, and we're looking at it from a present day perspective, but back then it would have been more normal. But if you look at it now, okay, so the first 3 episodes, the first one was the man trap, in which the friendship between McCoy and Kirk is well established. We missed a lot building up to that, and the relationship with Spock in there too is well established. And then Charlie X is the next episode. I think that kind of is in the same vein as far as the character development and the friendships and all of that. And then all of a sudden we jump backward in time to Where No Man Has Gone Before, which was the second pilot episode, the one that got Star Trek on the air. Of course, The Cage was the first one and it was rejected. And then they made another pilot episode, Where No Man Has Gone Before, and aired it as the third episode. And all of a sudden, everyone has different uniforms. Sulu is wearing a different color uniform. He has a different job. Dr. McCoy has vanished. There's some other doctor there. And Lahora is wearing a yellow uniform. Spock is wearing a yellow uniform. And they all got those turtlenecks. And like, people are acting differently and people have different jobs, and it's fucking weird. But I guess at the 60s, again, everything was so episodic that wouldn't be as jarring as it was now. But then you go into the next week and you see The Naked Time. You see this episode, and I think people would be drawn in by the characters, by the ensemble, and the high stakes and tension. So no episode previous to this, none of those first 3 that I mentioned, had the kind of stakes that this one has. So the ship is in serious danger, and I love the visuals, even though it's like 1960s, low budget. But I love, the ship goes when you see the view screen, and when they're in trouble, it goes and the planet is spinning in circles. But it's effective. They did a good job for what they had to work with. I think it's very effective when you see the planet spinning in circles and go and then you have Riley singing in the background behind that, going, "I'll take you home again, Kathleen," reminding us that he's taken over the engine room and we cannot do anything. They cannot do anything about this planet spinning thing. You have Spock and Kirk catching the disease right at the end. The people who are in charge are supposed to save the day. They're starting to go crazy too. And the tension is just so high. It is just so good. And nothing in the previous 3 episodes had done that. So this would have hooked me. And even though that wasn't necessarily the case, I look back at this as a truly great quintessential Star Trek episode. And then I mentioned the ensemble in this episode. Everyone has something to do, and this is the first episode in the air date order in which that is the case, and it is something the original series should have done more often. We have Sulu and Riley. Riley is, in retrospect, just a background character now who only appeared in 2 episodes, but at the time he was very much as important as Sulu or Uhura was, as far as anyone knew. And them playing a big role in getting to be a little bit crazy, and Sulu getting to run around with his shirt off chasing people with a sword. I'm sure George Takei had to have a fun time with that. I don't know. And then Scotty plays a role. McCoy plays a role. Kirk and Spock, of course, are forefront. But Uhura, this is one of the best Uhura episodes. So that line that I have in my screen name there is when Sulu with the sword grabs her and goes, "I'll protect you, fair maiden." And she goes, "Sorry, neither." That's such a great line. She's neither fair nor a maiden. And I wish they had given Uhura more lines like that, more personality. You get to see her personality a little bit through most of the series. She's a glorified secretary, just taking phone calls and contacting Starfleet or headquarters or Starbase or whatever. But I love seeing a little bit of her personality. And later in the episode, she has this little exchange with Kirk where Kirk is getting a little testy with her, like, can you shut that off? You know, the Riley singing the song thing. Can you shut that off? And she's like, don't you think I would have done it if I could, sir? And then they kind of just have this exchange, like, and they're both like, oh, I'm sorry. And it's a really nice moment. Like, neither of them have the disease at this point. But they're both, you know, they're getting testy. The tension, it shows that the tension is raising it, and they have that respect for each other where they're like, I'm sorry. And that's a really key moment. I really wish we had many more Kirk and Uhura moments. We have very few of them. By the time we get to the films, it is established that they definitely have a bond. They have a friendship. But it wasn't seen enough in the shows. And so I have no problem with Stranger New Worlds now coming and retconning a backstory between the two of them, that they had this previously established friendship, because I wanted to see more of that. I wanted to see more of that bond. So that was a great moment. Uhura, by the way, one of 3 people in our main cast who did not get the disease. Scotty didn't get it, which is good because they kind of needed him. McCoy didn't get it, which is good because they needed him. And Uhura never got it. Although it seems like she should have gotten it from Sulu when he grabbed her, but maybe it needs to be skin-to-skin contact. I don't know. That wasn't super clear. But anyways, yeah, so I love the characters in this episode. And once again, with the tension, so we have Kirk and Spock getting it right at the very end, right when they're most needed. And Spock, of course, has the line, I am in control of my emotions. And I've mentioned this in previous videos, but I always have this memory of my youngest brother, who some of you know from Enchantment of Eternity, when he was much, much younger, getting drunk and going, I am in control of my emotions. Quoting this episode. And then I began doing that too. Whenever I would get a little high or drunk, I would quote the Spock line. Now, Spock does, you know, once Kirk catches it, he kind of gets over it a little bit. But I can buy it because he's a Vulcan and he's trying to control his emotions, as he keeps saying that line. And I can buy that he might snap out of it. Nothing anywhere near as bad what they would do with Commander Riker in the spinoff rip-off episode, whatever you want to call it, The Naked Now. That was a horrible episode. I'm much more by what Spock does here. Now, Kirk, when you look at it now, it looks a little bit silly, and I like to get a little laugh out of this because he touches Spock, he gets the disease, and then immediately goes, wow. That's really funny. I think my brother has mentioned that bothers him, and I can see how that might bother people, but I just find it funny, and it doesn't bother me because it is effective in raising the tension, because it's right at the end. It's go time. It's crucial, and our 2 lead guys have the disease now, and I think it does add to the tension. And I think in the 60s it probably didn't look as ridiculous to the audience as it does to us looking back at it, where just all of a sudden he's like, lava. It's pretty funny, but it works. And I do like at the end when McCoy like rips off his sleeve and gives him the and you can't even tell, like, he just kind of walks, you know, and onto the bridge, like, da, 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 like, and then he sits down and goes, no, bitch, to walk on. Like, it's so good. Like, I love this. It should also be noted that this is the very first virus episode, that virus trope that I generally hate, but this is the first one. This is the original. This is the best one, in my opinion. All the other virus episodes are trying to copy this or emulate this episode. Worst of all being that aforementioned Naked Now on the Next Generation, an abysmal episode. But even any episode where the crew gets some disease and makes them act funny and or some weird things happen to them, like, is just trying to emulate this episode, and nothing will ever top this episode. This is the only truly great virus episode, in my opinion. You do have to suspend disbelief a little bit. The guy at the beginning of the episode who first gets the disease is a moron. He's wearing his protective gear and he takes it off to rub his nose, which anyone who's been trained in anything should know not to do that. But whatever. It's the 60s. I don't care. This is still the only truly great virus episode, in my opinion. And it is number 17 in my top 100. It is one of the all-time greats for me personally. So now, let us go ahead and move on to my number 16.
Sweet 16.
Okay, let's talk about my number 16, and we get the first of the 3 Deep Space Nine episodes that I will talk about in this particular video. And it is from the 2nd season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. My number 16 is Crossover from Star Trek Deep Space Nine's 2nd season. This is the sequel to Mirror Mirror from the original series, which is still to come in this top 100. So I should start there, I think, because I do have Mirror Mirror higher ranked than I have Crossover. And yet, if you saw my top 10 best parallel universe episode video that I did a few months ago, my number 1 was Crossover, and my number 2 was Mirror Mirror. Well, how can that be? And that is because I think this is an objectively better parallel universe episode. Objectively is probably not the best term to use because it's my opinion, but I do just think that it's a better parallel universe episode, taking out everything else considered. But I think Mirror Mirror is a better overall episode, which is why I have it ranked higher. And there's a lot more factors that go into it, like my nostalgia, like how important the episode was to me as a kid, and all those sorts of things kind of factor into it, which probably has to boost this up or boost Mirror Mirror up over Crossover in my top 100. However, if you just kind of look at it from a writing standpoint, I think that this is an improvement over the original Mirror Mirror episode. Also, from an acting standpoint, I would say that this is an improvement. It's more sophisticated. It is more complex and interesting writing than the first one. They took a concept from the original series and turned it on its head, rather than just simply having evil versions of our characters, just as the original series did. They flip it upside down to where the once evil empire has now been overthrown, and the people turned into slaves. So instead of the humans being, the evil empire, they are now the slaves. And that's a very interesting concept and a very interesting way to revisit the Mirror Universe. Now, at first, I know I was a little bit disappointed because there was a Next Generation novel. I believe it was Peter David. I think it was called like Dark Mirror or something, not to be confused with Black Mirror, but I think it was something like that, where it was a straight up Mirror Universe of the Enterprise D prior to this episode being made. And that book, of course, is not canon. All those books are not canon. But I remember thinking that I wanted them to do that. I wish they would do that in canon. And instead they did this. So my initial reaction was a little bit of disappointment. But even by the time my first viewing of the episode ended, by the time I finished watching it, I think I had come around. And then I, of course, have seen it many, many times since then. And now I consider it number 16 in all of Star Trek. And I consider it the best parallel universe episode. The reason being is because Intendant Kira is a much more complex character than anyone in Mirror Mirror, including Spock. I think the evil Spock would probably have to be your most complex character in that original episode. But I think Kira is even more complex than that. There are certainly shades of gray. Intendant Kira, I'm referring to the Mirror Universe version of her, many more shades of gray within her. And she would later devolve into this cartoonish mustache twirly villain, especially by the time we get to season 6 and 7. And that season 7 Mirror Universe episode is just ridiculous. It was actually my number 1 worst parallel universe episode when I did my worst list. It gets this whole mirror universe crossover thing gets worse and worse with each successive season, in my opinion, until we get to the end. So Intended Kira does eventually devolve into a ridiculous character, but in this episode, she's a very interesting character, and Nana Visitor knocks it out of the park. I don't care what people say about her acting. People like to knock on her. She knocks it out of the park in this episode. She's phenomenal, playing both versions of Kira. Much like what I said with Janeway back in my number 25, playing two different versions of the same characters. Sometimes actors are able to really shine in doing that, and I feel like Nana Visitor was able to do that. Also, this is a new thing, having a character meet themselves, meeting their mirror alternative, because that did not happen in Mirror Mirror. Nobody met themselves. So I think doing that adds to the intrigue of this episode, and is one of the reasons why I would say that it is a step up from Mirror Mirror in a lot of ways. Now we do have a really odd pairing of Kira and Bashir. Like, how often do those two hang out? Like, what were they doing on a away mission together? And I mean, it's weird, but I forgive it because you wanted Bashir to be there to make that connection with O'Brien, didn't you? Like, that was kind of necessary. At this stage in the show, I believe O'Brien and Bashir were still developing their friendship. In fact, I think Bashir tells a little white lie about how close of friends that they are when he tells the alternate O'Brien, Smiley. He tells him that, we're the best friends or whatever. And I don't know if that's quite true at this point yet, but it would become true. I'm definitely sure. So I do think it was important to have Bashir there to make that connection with O'Brien, even if Bashir and Kira together in a shuttlecraft, that's weird, but it works. it all works out. Now, this episode, like the last one that I talked about, my number 17, there's a lot of great lines. I only mentioned one in number 17. I only mentioned sorry, neither, but there's other great ones I've neglected to mention. But this one was very quotable. My brother and I have quoted this so many times over the years. Of course, we love to talk about Cisco and his nickname for O'Brien, Smiley. I call you Smiley. I don't like O'Brien. I call you Smiley. That's always fun. And this just episode really plays to Avery Brooks' strengths. Same reason that I like him in Man Bashir getting to play a Bond villain, because when he gets to be kind of over the top and hammy like this, I think that's where Avery Brooks really shines. And another line that he has is when Kira goes up to him and tells him Garrick's plan. He's like, "Oh, well, now that's small creative that he usually gets." And I realize that I do exaggerate his voice when I've been quoting this over the years. I always say, "That's small creative that he usually gets." It doesn't quite say it like that. But it's still fun. It's still fun to watch Avery Brooks recite that line. And Garrick, getting a different side of Garrick, getting kind of more of the nuts and bolts of the truly evil Garrick, maybe a little bit more less complex Garrick than we have in the Prime universe, but a fun character, at least in this episode, and still having the great lines as our Garrick does. My favorite Garrick line in this is when he's saying, "She'll be gone" to Kira, and Kira's like, "Well, what do you mean she'll be gone?" And he's like, "She'll be gone. Please don't make me use some foolish euphemism." That has always been one of my favorite lines that I like to quote. "Please don't make me use some foolish euphemism." Because typically villainous characters will use some kind of foolish euphemism to talk about killing somebody. And I really appreciated that in this episode. All in all, we do get some evil versions of our characters. We do get like the evil Odo. But not all of them are like that. And it's interesting seeing that Quark is actually the good Quark, and he does not care about gold press latinum. So things are just so much more black or less black and white, so much more intricate than the original. Everybody is evil. Everybody has beards. Everybody goes like this. Whatever. There's a lot more complexity to this. So, to me, crossover is one of the all-time great episodes, and I still consider the best parallel universe episode, even if Mirror Mirror is still to come. I know it sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, but I do feel like you're looking at Mirror Mirror overall as an episode, and there's a lot of nostalgia and factors into it and that sort of thing. I would put it higher, but crossover, a truly all-time great. And I haven't done this yet in this video, so I'm going to make sure that I do this chef's kiss for a crossover, because if I did chef's kiss for 25 through 18, I have to do chef's kisses for 17 through 11, because these are even better. And crossover is one of the true greats in Star Trek. Now I'll let us move on to do a couple of episodes from that ever dominant Star Trek The Next Generation.
Number 15.
All right, let's get into my number 15, which comes from that phenomenal 6th season of Star Trek The Next Generation. My number 15 is Tapestry. So as I mentioned previously, the 6th season of The Next Generation does have the most entries in my top 50 with 6, and the most entries in my top 25 with 4. And little tiny bit of a spoiler here. You're about to get back-to-back entries from that amazing season 6 of The Next Generation, starting with this one, Tapestry. Now, in my previous video at number 19, I talked about the Inner Light, and I talked about how there was another episode that sort of had a similar kind of format, with Picard really running the show and being the main character throughout the episode, with all the other characters really doing nothing but trying to revive Picard. And that was the case both in the Inner Light and here. Although I would say the other characters actually had more to do at the Inner Light, whereas here you barely see them, except for in that interesting little alternate timeline scene that we get toward the end, which I will get to. But this is the Picard show, and when you compare the two, I have to have Tapestry higher than the Inner Light. I just think this is a slightly more interesting, more engaging, and much more important to the character growth of Jean-Luc Picard himself. Whereas in the previous episode in the Inner Light, he is taking on the role of kind of a different person. I mean, he's the same person, but he's a different person. He becomes Galen instead of Jean-Luc Picard, whereas this gets to the heart and soul, the core of Jean-Luc Picard as a character, and that's why I will always have Tapestry ranked higher than the Inner Light. Yeah, so we get to the heart of Picard's character, no pun intended, by talking about his artificial heart and the regrets that he had around that. Now, this had been mentioned in a previous episode back in the 2nd season when he was off on the shuttlecraft with Wesley, and it may have been alluded to here and there as well. But we know that there is this weight that Picard carries, this regret of the foolish young man that he was. And he learns a very valuable lesson that I think is not only applies to him personally and applies to his character growth, but I think it's something that all of us, as we get older and start to have regrets about our youth, can maybe keep in mind and take to heart that we were morons, a lot of us, I think probably all of us, when we were younger. Hopefully most of us get past being a moron when we get older. We can only hope. And do some pretty stupid things. But it's not just if you did those stupid things that matters, is did you learn from them? Did you grow? Did you become a better person? And I think that's something that Picard learns in this episode. And I absolutely love that it is Q who teaches him this. This is the first time, and I think we'll see this again in All Good Things, where Q kind of acts as a mentor. He's a very antagonistic mentor, but I mean, it's very much a tough love type of thing. But the lesson he teaches is very vital to Picard. That's why I hate what Picard season 2 did when he was like, just give me a hug. No, that's not how it works. Anyway, don't get me started on Picard season 2. This is where it's done well, although it is never clear if this was actually Q or if this was some sort of hallucination, some sort of vision that he had. We don't really know what actually happened. And if it really was Q, did he really send him back in time, or was it still just one of those things where he's fucking with people, which he's done before? So all of that is vague, and I really like that about this episode, that it's all vague. It does cause a little bit of conflict between my brother and I, because he wants to count this as a time travel episode. And was there time travel? I don't think that that's clear, and I choose to believe that it wasn't actually time travel because I'm such a stickler for time travel logic and the timeline making sense. And if this was actually time travel, then Picard went back and changed history all the way up to the point of where he starts fighting with the Norsekins. So now his history is that he was trying to talk Corey out of it, and he had a relationship with Martha. That is now his history, if this was really time travel. So I choose to believe that it is not time travel, so that we can have time travel logic that makes sense. And I'm very well within my rights, because it is not explained. It is not clear. It is left intentionally vague as to what actually happened. Was this really Q? And even if it was really Q, did this really happen? Was this really time travel? I choose to say no for the sake of time travel logic. I choose to believe that it really was Q, but that he didn't really travel in time. But we don't know. And I actually love that about this episode. I love that it is left open-ended like that. A lot of times when episodes are left open-ended, it can be very powerful and add to the power of the episode. So I really appreciate that. Now, I do want to get into what I alluded to earlier, that alternate timeline that we get a little glimpse of. I think that that's really haunting. That might be an unusual word to use here, but to me, to see the great man that we have come to know, like this true leader, and someone that even we as the audience can really admire as a leader. I still think he is easily the best captain in Star Trek history out of all the shows. And to see him reduced to this junior grade lieutenant who has just kind of meandered all throughout his career, and has never found a place in Starfleet, never found his voice, has just kind of blended in with the crowd. I consider that to be haunting, because that is so not the person that we've really come to know and love. And Jean-Luc himself feels that way. I'm like, no, this is not who I am. And he has that great line, I would rather die the person that I was than to live the life I just saw. And I would tend to agree with him. I would rather they just kill Jean-Luc to turn him into that, because that is not Jean-Luc Picard. There's some suspension of disbelief there. Like, would they really, Picard or Riker and Troy, would they really know that much detail about some random like junior grade lieutenant who works in astrophysics or whatever department they said he worked in? Probably not, but it is really effective for the episode, and it really drives home the point that Picard needed to be that arrogant prick that he was when he was younger, in order to get where he would later in life. And you can even see that as you're watching the episode of Picard does come off as like kind of like a prude. Like he's it's like, relax, dude. Like, I don't know, like you're a little too uptight. So you can then see how that would lead to that result, and it is so effective in teaching that really valuable lesson for all of those of us who are aging, and for you youngins who, for whatever reason, are watching me, when you get older, you'll start to learn that some of the mistakes that you made in your youth, if you did the right thing and you learned from them and gained from them and became a better person because of them, that they were valuable experiences for you. This is such a powerful lesson for us, but a very powerful lesson for this amazing character played by this amazing actor. I should mention that as well, but that almost goes without saying. Patrick Stewart always knocks it out of the park. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next century. So why don't we go ahead? Why don't we go ahead and move on to my number 14. So let me just wrap this up by saying that Tapestry, truly one of the greats. Got to do that for Tapestry. One of the great Picard episodes, one of the great Picard and Q episodes. So it is number 15 in all of Star Trek, and my whole top 100 is all the way up at number 15. Now, let's go ahead and move into that number 14.
Number 14.
Okay, let's move on to my number 14. I've already given a couple hints. The 6th season from The Next Generation. Amazing acting from Patrick Stewart. This, of course, can be none other than my number 14, Chain of Command, Parts 1 and 2. And remember my rule, anytime there's a two-parter that has the same title with Parts 1 and 2, I count it as one entity. I view it as like 1 2-hour episode. So that is the case here. And much like an entry way earlier in my top 100, way back at number 91 with Unification, Parts 1 and 2, this one is really dependent on its Part 2. I wouldn't say that Part 1 here is as bad as Part 1 of Unification. I said that Unification Part 1 is a big nothing burger. It is really like a waste of time. Like, no, really. I mean, it does set up for Part 2, but it is kind of not that great. Whereas I wouldn't go that far for Unification, or for rather Chain of Command Part 1 here. Whereas we do get some important development for the Jellicoe situation on the Enterprise. We get the setup for what leads Picard to be tortured, although he does not get tortured until Part 2. And that, let's be real, is the reason why this is number 14 in my top 100. It's that Patrick Stewart and David Warner dynamic. It's like almost like everybody else just get the hell off of the set and let these two guys go at it. Although we did need that Enterprise, Jellicoe, Riker, Cardassian B-plot, which is actually a really strong B-plot. It's not the same situation as it was back in number 20 with Tacking Into the Wind, where I said it was basically like two A-plots, two really strong A-plots. One was technically a B-plot. In this case, the Enterprise, Jellicoe, Riker storyline is very clearly the B plot, but it's a very strong supporting plot. It complements the A plot. It works well in conjunction with it. So the B plot is not to be overlooked. But it is the torture scenes and Patrick Stewart's incredible performance. And honestly, the chemistry he has with David Warner in this, the now late David Warner, is what makes this number 14, one of the all-time greats. So let's, of course, talk about that. But I also, before this is all said and done, I do want to talk about that B-plot as well. Now, as for that A-plot, so there is one line that, of course, is iconic that this episode is most known for. And you notice I did not put it on my screen name over there because it's just, I don't know, like that's what you expect to put on there. That's what everybody says all the time. Not to undermine that line and the importance of that line. I am, of course, talking about there are four lights. Not to take away the importance of that. I do want to talk about that too, but I think a more pivotal scene and a more important scene and maybe even more impressive acting-wise was the scene where Gul Musset, played by David Warner, after having tortured Picard already, putting him through the rigmarole. Would sit down and have these like pleasant conversations with him as if he wasn't torturing him. And he told this kind of offhand story about his youth and a bully who was picking on him, and so on and so forth. And Picard turned that against him because this is very much, I don't know, I don't want to say dick measuring contest because that is a very inappropriate way to describe torture, but it is definitely one person trying to get power over the other. It is definitely a power struggle. And Picard, even while being tortured, completely becomes the alpha here and completely puts himself in the power position over Gul Musset, and that drives Gul Musset insane, which causes him to torture him even more. And the fact that he has to resort to so much torture just only proves that Picard is in the power position here. And he does so by just saying kind of, casually offhand, now whenever I see you, I will always see nothing but that 6-year-old little boy who is being bullied, and I pity you. And he knew that would get under Gul Musset's skin, and it absolutely did. And Gul Musset is not able to recover from that. He tries to compensate by forcing Picard to once again say that there are 5 lights. But at this point, Picard is in the power position. He's like, fuck, there aren't 5 lights. There's 4, you little boy. And he's very much in the power position at this point. And that's when he just, I believe he leaves the thing on and walks away. He said he was going to do that. And he's just torturing him far worse than he ever had before. And Picard is still going, you are a little boy! And is still in that power position. Even while he's going and being tortured, and still saying, you are and I watched that scene again when I rewatched this episode to do this video, and the power of Patrick Stewart's performance there is absolutely incredible. This is, I don't know how to describe it. This is a man in pain, a man being physically tortured, who still has power over another man. And I'm not to downplay the atrocities and horrors of torture. I'm not saying, hey guys, if you ever want to show power over somebody, have them torture you and then call them a little boy or whatever, get the psychological advantage over them. But Picard being put in this position, that is really the only thing that he can do. And that probably helped his sanity. Because as we just actually talked about in the last entry, Picard has a lot of pride in who he is as this great leader. And Musset is trying to knock him down and take that all away. So for Picard to still hold on to this power position, kind of holds on to his pride, probably keeps him going, probably keeps him from breaking by doing that. So it is a defense mechanism, really, to put himself in that power position. And it's a really incredible scene. And the exchange between these two characters all throughout is really great. But I think that is the one key scene for me. Now, of course, we do have to mention the aforementioned "there are 4 lights," because this is at the very end when Gul Musset is supposed to let him go, but is not telling Picard that because he wants one more. He wants to gain that power position one last time. He wants to force him to say that there are 5 lights by offering this phony choice that he can go live a life of luxury, or he could continue to be tortured for the rest of his life, when in reality he is supposed to be releasing him at that moment. Picard, of course, once the Cardassians come in and say, hey, he's supposed to be ready by now. Let's get him out of here. Then shouts the iconic line, there are 4 lights. But then we get the haunting reveal at the end that he reveals to Counselor Troy that he very much was ready to say that there are 5 lights, and he would do anything to say that there are 5 lights. And in fact, he actually saw 5 lights. And this is a real thing. This is a thing that can happen as a result of torture. So that was a very haunting and powerful scene as well. But it shows us that he, although as far as Gul Macet ever knew, had the power position, had the power over him, but in actuality, Gul Macet had broken him. Fortunately, he never knew that. Picard never revealed to Gul Macet that actually he had been broken down and was ready to admit that there are 5 lights. So the psychology here is just so fascinating. That it's just, I mean, it is brutal. I don't want to downplay that. I don't want to make it sound like this is, we're just watching a casual game of soccer or whatever, or football, as you other people call it in other parts of the world, except for me here in America. I don't want to make it sound like a casual sport. But this is also fiction. So I think in fiction, you can have the luxury to maybe take a step back and kind of look at the more interesting human psychological aspect of something horrific like this. I wouldn't be looking at something that really happened like this and go, oh, well, isn't that interesting? Although I guess some people do that for a career. I wouldn't. But in a fiction setting, this is all really fascinating. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about this strong B plot, because I do feel that it helps to raise the tension on the Enterprise side of things. And it's interesting that we have another power struggle here, whereas in this case, the Cardassian commander, whose name I forget, has the power position over Jellicoe. Because Jellicoe, he's a terrible captain. He really is. Any argument to say that he's not is just full of shit. It's just objectively wrong. And I'll get into more reasons why that is, why it's objectively wrong in a second. But as far as this power struggle, Picard is being tortured and he's got the power position over the Gul Macet. Jellicoe is in perfectly cozy on the Enterprise, not being tortured, and he is in the beta position. Jellicoe is an awful captain. Because his way of trying to be the alpha and be the power is these dumbass tricks that he tries to play, where he tries to make the Cardassian dude wait for a long period of time, and then he comes up with these ridiculous, like, 8th grader level of plans where he tells, okay, so Riker, you go and pretend to be upset, and then Troy, you go to pretend to say this and lie to this, blah, 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 blah. This is dumb. That is dumb. Those are all dumbass plans. Whereas in reality, all the Cardassian commander had to do to gain power is just to tell him the truth. Oh yeah, we have fucking Picard. Here's a video of him confessing. What are you going to do now? And Jellicoe's just like he sucks. He's not a good negotiator at all. And I can't even believe that they chose him to be the negotiator here, because he's not good. Now, as far as how he's a terrible captain, that doesn't even scratch the surface. Anyone who says that he's not a terrible captain is objectively wrong, because if you know anything about what makes a good leader, whether you're a captain, whether you're the leader of a team of paraprofessionals in an education setting, as I am, whether you are the manager at McDonald's, whether you are a business leader, whatever position of leadership, no matter what it is, one of the most basic elements of being a leader is gaining the trust of the people who work under you and gaining their belief in you, allowing them to trust in you, believe in you, and want to work for you, and want to do their best for you. The absolute worst thing any leader can do in any position is to try to gain power over the people under him or her. And as Riker actually wraps it up really, he sums it up really nicely when he is going on that rant about how Jellicoe is not a particularly good captain, how he has to have everyone wrapped up around his finger at all times. There's no joy in anything. You are never, ever going to be an effective leader when you behave that way. This is basic leadership 101 stuff. So any nonsense about how he's a good negotiator, which I also would disagree with, but even if you want to make an argument he's a good negotiator, if you want to make an argument about he did the plan with the mines and that was good, blah, 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 all of that means nothing because he's not an effective leader because he wants to have power over the people under him. This is basic leadership 101 stuff. He is an objectively bad captain, and anyone who says he's not a bad captain is just objectively wrong. Anyways, I went on this rant. I didn't even really talk about why I like this storyline. I do, in fact, think that this was a good complementary storyline to the Picard torture storyline. So I think, honestly, that's all I want to say about these two episodes. You know, it is one of Patrick Stewart's greatest performances. This will always be, to me, one of the all-time best episodes in Star Trek. So it is Chain of Command Parts 1 and 2 at number 14 in my top 100. And now we can move on to my number 13.
Lucky number 13.
All right, let's move on to my number 13, all the way up to lucky number 13. And it comes from Star Trek Voyager. Haven't had an episode from Star Trek Voyager for a little bit, but here is one from season 6 of Star Trek Voyager. My number 13 is Blink of an Eye from Star Trek Voyager. So this is from the 6th season of Voyager, but unlike the 6 seasons of Deep Space Nine and Next Generation, season 6 of Voyager, in my opinion, sucks. So this is the only episode that is any good at all. I think there's a lot of mediocre episodes in season 6, like Tinkerton or Dr. Spy. I've talked about before. People think it's great. I think it's fine. And there are other episodes like that in season 6 that I think are fine. But God, I was looking at the list of season 6 episodes again, and I'm like, God, these episodes are terrible. And it has Alice in that episode, in that season, which is I named my least favorite Voyager episode of all of them. So a rare find out of season 6 of Voyager. And this is a very episodic episode, meaning it doesn't have anything to do with the continuity of the rest of Voyager. And I have complained about that I don't think Voyager had enough continuity, or that it was too episodic and hit the reset button every week. But this one works in that context. This is an excellent standalone single episode that doesn't need any continuity around it. All the things that I've said about Voyager that I wish they did more of, like showing the more dire nature of them being lost and cut off from their main source of the Federation, and for things carrying on from one episode to the next. None of that applies here. This works as a standalone episode, and I've also complained that Voyager often feels like it could take place just as easily as in the Alpha Quadrant as the Delta Quadrant. But in this case, I would say that this does work as a Delta Quadrant episode because this planet is so different than anything else any of our other starships in the Federation that we have seen have ever encountered before. This is such a new phenomenon, and you can come across new phenomenon in the Alpha Quadrant. But to have something very different take place in the Delta Quadrant, that's actually another thing that I wish Voyager did more of. I think having things that are very different from anything else that our previous Federation crews have ever encountered. I think so. In that way, this works for me in the Delta Quadrant, and this works for me as a standalone, singular episode. And it is a phenomenal standalone episode because of the concept. I think this is one of my favorite concepts in all of Star Trek, and it is one that I wished that Star Trek had addressed all the way up until they actually did it. Like this was one of my wish list. Like I wanted there to be an episode like this, and none of the shows ever did it until we finally got to see it in Voyager. Now this is a concept that I had been fascinated with since I had first heard about it when I was younger. This is part of Einstein's theory of relativity. So a part of that theory is that if someone were to theoretically travel beyond the speed of light, that if they were to go away for like a day, they would come back and it would be, 10 years later or whatever. I'm not sure what the exact equation is, but you could go away for, a week and then 100 years has passed or whatever. That kind of effect is supposedly what would happen if, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, if a person were to travel beyond the speed of light. And I had kind of wondered, well, warp drive is what, however many times beyond the speed of light that it is. Why does this not happen? And I remember reading an explanation for it one time, and it was something technobabble warp drive. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. They don't know. There's no real reason. Because, as I previously said in my previous video, all of Star Trek is junk science. So when people complain about it being junk science, like particular episodes like Deadlock, I'm like, but all of Star Trek is junk science. So it's just something that you just gotta accept. But since they did not incorporate that concept into their own technology, into the idea of warp drive, I wanted them to do an episode that addressed this concept. And this episode does such a wonderful job at it. I love how they are able to show us the development of this species, and it's consistent with each other. Like, it does really make sense. I mean, it probably takes them, I feel like, longer to get from radio waves to warp drive than humankind really did, but who cares? It doesn't really matter. Humankind did in the Star Trek universe, because we obviously don't have warp drive in real life, but you know what I mean. But I thought it was well paced. I thought the development of the society was well paced. And I love seeing these different characters from different time periods and being invested in them and being invested in these people. And I absolutely love that they sent the doctor down, who was supposed to only be there for 3 seconds. And then, of course, they lost him and they couldn't get him back right away. So it took longer. So he was supposed to only be gone for 2 days, but he ends up being gone for 3 years. He had a whole life down there. He's following sports teams and all of that stuff. That was really cool. I will say I'm not a huge fan of this thing about him having a son, and then when I'm going to call him Jin, Daniel Day Kim's character asks, but I thought you were a hologram. He goes, oh, it's complicated. Come on, you can't just drop that the doctor has a son and then don't give any explanation as to how that's possible. I think you leave the son part out of this story personally. So that would be my own, maybe one little teeny tiny gripe of the episode, but it's such a very minor, very small little thing that it does not obviously affect this episode from being all the way up in number 13. Number 13 is a big deal in my entire Star Trek 100, based off of the entire Star Trek franchise of the first 5 legacy series, which is like 700 episodes or whatever it is. So number 13 is a big deal. So the doctor having a son doesn't really hurt it, but it is one little gripe that I have, that they just drop that in there with zero explanation as to how a hologram had a son. Just saying, oh, it's complicated. Anyways, moving on, though, I still love that whole concept of the doctor getting to spend 3 years down there. This was just a really well-paced story, which captivated me even more. I was already captivated by the concept to begin with, but the pacing worked so beautifully well. And the characters that they introduced, even though they would only be there, you would only see them from one scene. Like the 2 dudes who were trying to do the radio call to Voyager and finally actually did get through to them. And then Voyager was like, oh, well, he's died 100 years ago at this point. So there's no point in contact in answering his call. Those guys, like, I became invested in them. And then Daniel Day Kim, Jin, already I'm going to be invested in him because he's a familiar face. Like, he wasn't a familiar face when I very first saw this episode, but now all I can think of is Jen from Lost. When I first saw this episode, Lost wasn't out yet, but he's a character that you love and you become attached to very, very quickly. And I love it when there's characters that actually work and get along with our crew and aren't always adversarial. So I loved all of this. This was excellent storytelling and excellent character development. I wish Voyager could have done more episodes like this. I say that about all the Voyager episodes in my top 100. I wish they could have done more like this. They don't all have to have that continuity that I've complained about Voyager not having. I think having a standalone episode like this was something very new and unique. Works extraordinarily well for me as well. So I think that's about all I've got to say about my wonderful number 13, not unlucky 13, a very amazing episode in Star Trek. Blink of an eye from Star Trek Voyager. Now, let us go ahead and talk about my number 12. And you know what? While we're at it, let's go ahead and talk about my number 11 too. Let's go ahead and do that.
Number 12 and number 11.
All right, let's go ahead and close out this video by talking about my numbers 12 and numbers 11 at the same time. So we're in another one of those situations that we've come across before in my top 100, where I am combining two Deep Space Nine episodes that are essentially a two-parter, but have separate titles. So by rule, I count them separately. And it doesn't always work out this neatly where I can put two episodes that are a de facto two-parter together like this in my top 100. You can see the debauchery back in my top 25, numbers 24 through 21, like that kind of a mess that I had to do with the Enterprise, because I got to be honest about how I feel about the episodes. So I can't just say, oh, number 23 is Damage because it came earlier. Number 22 is the Council because it was the first part of the number 21 is the countdown, and then let's say number 20 is 0 Hour, and just put them in order like that, because that would be a lie. That's not how I feel about those episodes. I actually think part 1 of that trilogy is the best one, and I think Damage is a little better than part 2 of the trilogy, and then part 3 of the trilogy is way back there. So I had to make it all weird because I got to be honest about how I feel. However, with a lot of these Deep Space Nine two-parters, I do see them on equal ground, so that's why a lot of them get to be back-to-back. But again, because they have separate titles, I do have to give them each their own number. So, all of that preamble, and if you haven't guessed already, my number 12 is Favor the Bold from Deep Space Nine's Season 6, and my number 11 is Sacrifice of Angels, the very next episode from Deep Space Nine Season 6. These are the two concluding episodes of that 6-episode station takeover story arc at the start of Season 6, where the Dominion has taken the station. They've renamed it Tarek Noor, and Gul Dukat and Wayun and the female changeling are running things over there, while Cisco and his Starfleet crew are off running around doing other things off in space. It is that whole arc. So these are the two episodes that conclude that arc. Now, these two episodes I do consider as a two-parter, even though they are part of that overall 6-episode arc. And I kind of wish they had been given the same title and maybe even aired together originally. Like, I don't know if they did. I don't remember those so long ago, but aired together and given the same title and just be like a 2-hour special. It could be like, it wouldn't even be a mid-season finale, but like a quarter season finale. Maybe you take a break after these 2 episodes, and they might have actually done that in real life, taking the break after this. But in any case, I think it should have been one 2-hour special episode with one title, because even though these are a part of that 6-episode story arc, I do see them as one story with one beginning, middle, and end. The previous 4 episodes in this arc, while they all do connect, and there are through lines throughout this thread, like this female changeling brainwashing Odo is one of them. Just as an example, one thread that carries through from one episode to the next. Each individual episode in the previous 4 had its own beginning, middle, and end. Like, for example, Rocks and Shoals, the one where they were all stuck on the planet with Jim Hadar, that had a very clear beginning, middle, and end. The crappy Alexander one, which is the only one of these that did not make my top 100, though that episode sucked, had a very clear beginning, middle, and end. Even though throughout these episodes, there are still running threads that go through the whole story arc. These 2 episodes, the beginning of the story is the beginning of Favor the Bold, the middle is the end of Favor the Bold, and the beginning of Sacrifice of Angels, and the end is Sacrifice of Angels. So I really do consider these 2 episodes together. But going to talk about them individually. So we'll start with number 12, which is Favor the Bold, and saying that title just makes me say, Fortune favors the bold. Because this was, of course, the line that Boimler had when he was actually on Deep Space Nine, because this was during the Bold Boimler story arc, and he was playing Dabo, and he kept gambling, and he said, Fortune favors the bold. And it didn't even occur to me until just recently that he was actually quoting a title of a Deep Space Nine episode, and knowing Lower Decks as I do, I am certain that that was very intentional to have him quote the title of a Deep Space Nine episode. But now I always think of it, Fortune favors the bold. And Cisco actually also says the name of this episode at the very end. One of the few times where the names of an episode is actually mentioned in the episode, which happens from time to time in Star Trek. But Cisco also says, there's an old saying, Fortune favors the bold. But I will still always think of Boimler before I think of Cisco. Anyways, so this episode definitely is the first part. If you're looking at it as a movie, it is the first act of the movie. It is setting up for what is to come. But it is extraordinarily effective at that. And I do not consider this in the same vein of like Chain of Command Part 1 or Unification Part 1, where the first part is just kind of a throwaway and all the meat is in the second part. I think obviously the main thrust of the action is in the second part, but the first part is equally as effective. So when I put them back to back like this and put Sacrifice of Angels slightly ahead of it at number 11, this is appropriate to me. This is on its own my number 12, but it also serves to set up for my number 11, which is Sacrifice of Angels. I think so. We have all the foundation is laid for this. We have the continuing story of Odo kind of fallen for the female changelings urgings to join the Great Link, and so that is still happening. We have the tension with Rom about to be executed, and Quark like not sure what to do about this, and not really wanting to be the big hero here, and then forced to, I believe actually in the next part, he is eventually forced to become the big hero. But we're laying the groundwork for all of that, and we're laying the groundwork for the tension and the main thrust of the story with the big attack that is about to come on the station. In fact, this is one of my favorite starts to an episode. This is one of my favorite like pre-cold open. It's like the live from New York, it's Saturday night type line, like the last line before the credits roll, when Cisco says, "We're going to retake Deep Space Nine." Like, like immediately like pulls you in. I freaking love that line because right away we know what we're doing. And of course there's some tension with the admirals, and this isn't like sometimes they have this fakey adversarial admiral stuff in Star Trek, but the admiral's making legitimate points like, well, what about Earth? Or are we leaving Earth wide open? And later in Sacrifice of Angels, we do see that Wyun says that if we do conquer the Federation, Earth is the next thing we're going after. So that's not totally out of left field for that admiral to have that concern. So you've got that tension building, and then the tension is ratcheted up even a little bit more when it is revealed that they are about the Dominion that is about to take down the minefield. And I love how they use Morn to get a secret message to Cisco with the secret code on his mother's present. I love incorporating Morn into this. gotta give some chef's kisses. This is we're almost in the top 10 now. This is number 12. So absolutely love that. And with Gul Dukat, who I'll talk about when I get into Sacrifice of Angels, but we're starting to lay the groundwork for his downfall. Already he is too obsessed with getting Zial to like him and believe in him and be by his side and all of that stuff, and he's not keeping his eye on the ball. He's overlooking the real threat. He sends Damar off on a fool's errand to go and get Zial. And he actually wants Damar to not forcibly bring her, but like talk her into it, which Damar is completely not capable of that task at all. And he's spending time on that. And Damar makes a comment like, I think my time would be better spent tracking this fleet. Yeah, Damar should have been doing that. They might have figured out the Federation is coming for them a little sooner than they did. They may have been able to focus more on that. But because Dukat is so sidetracked with this stupid Zial thing, that he's taking his eye off the ball. And I think that does ultimately contribute to his downfall, which I'll talk about with the next episode. So the groundwork for everything is being laid down beautifully. So this is, I think the ideal of a setup episode, the first part of a two-part finale, or it's kind of the finale of this story arc, even if it isn't the finale of the season, but kind of this two-part movie event kind of thing. This is the best, I think, in the first part of one of those types of things. So even though it has a separate title, I still think it does deserve to be number 12. So fortune favors the bold. So now let's talk about the next part in this two-parter, which is my number 11, Sacrifice of Angels. So now, while Favor the Bold isn't a very effective setup episode, Sacrifice of Angels is an extraordinarily satisfying conclusion. Now, again, it's not the conclusion to the season, but it's a conclusion to this 6-episode, well, if you want to count the end of season 5, technically 7-episode story arc in which the Dominion have taken over the station and the Starfleet heroes are trying to get the station back. And then at the end, they end up back on the station and everybody can cheer. But there's a lot that happens to get to that point. This is extraordinarily satisfying. I know that I say this a lot, but a lot of the most effective Star Trek episodes do this well. The tension is high, and I'm on the edge of my seat. So many things could go wrong. It does still seem like Odo has been turned to the dark side, although you start to see him break a little bit. You're not 100% necessarily sure that he is going to turn back to the right side. Things are looking really bad for Rom, and now Kira, Jake, and Leela are joining him and in prison, and things are looking bad for them. Quark does not seem like he is up for this task. The Federation looks like they're in trouble. You see that Dukat completely knows what Cisco's strategy is and seems to have the upper hand. So things are not looking great. But this episode does so well in building to that end. And it actually starts off in a really exciting way. It starts off with a big battle. And I forgot to mention in Favor of the Bold, like they set up with all the ships going, like all the ships flying. There's a lot of Galaxy class ships in there too. Is the Enterprise here? What's the Enterprise doing in this time? Is this like the Klingon War with Pike's Enterprise, where they were just like, no, you stood aside? I know there was like a novel, non-canon novel written about that, but never really been addressed in canon what the Enterprise was doing. But anyways, you see all these ships gathering up at the end of Favor of the Bold, like da 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 da, and then they start right with a battle. And I don't care what anyone says, there ain't nothing wrong with a big Starfleet battle. Something that I always wanted to see, and I thought we were shorted by not getting to see Wolf 459, and I was actually really thrilled when we did get to see a glimpse of it in the series premiere of Deep Space Nine. So to me, I live for this. I love seeing these big battles when they're done well, and I thought this one was super exciting. And again, the tension is really high because you see that Dukat kind of knows what Cisco is up to and seems to be a step ahead. But we'll talk about Dukat's downfall again in a couple of minutes. I did just mention it, but we'll get to that because that's part of what makes this episode number 11. In fact, the Dukat storyline is probably what puts it up this high, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. But anyway, so we start off with this big battle. The excitement is high. And then so many great things happen. Quark being put in a position where he has to be the hero now. And you can see the look on his face when Kira, Jake, and Leela are all, put in prison. He's not. I don't know why Domar didn't think of Quark. I guess because Quark is kind of a slime ball, and he didn't think that Quark would do that. So I love that. But you see, like, Quark is now on his own, except that he actually does go and recruit Zial to help him. But that scene where he's like telling and he's clearly nervous, and he's like, don't move, go open the door. And Zial's like, well, you told him not to move. It's like, okay, you don't move, you go open the door. And you can see the Jim Hadar look at each other like, this guy's a joke, we're going to blast the shit out of him. And then Quark just goes, ah! It just takes them both down. So good. Such a great moment for Quark. And I love how this doesn't ultimately like change his character. And nor is it overlooked, nor is it like this never happened, but it also doesn't drastically, now he's some big hero guy. There's such a great scene. Another great scene is then Kira and Rom are trying to turn off the weapons so that they cannot destroy the minefield. And you see, I love how this was spliced together. You see simultaneously Rom and Kira saying, we did it, we turned off the weapons, and them saying fire, like kind of at the same time. So we think as the audience, well, of course our heroes have succeeded, the weapons are not going to work. And then we see the minefield being destroyed, and we're like, oh fuck, they're fucked. And I think that is such a great storytelling device to really set up the tension. Now we get to the ending, and I know that this has been, accused of being Deus Ex Machina, which is something that I will always push back against, because Deus Ex Machina to me is when a divine figure kind of just comes out of nowhere with no explanation, having nothing to do with anything, and just reaches in with the hand of God, which is what Deus Ex Machina is, and saves the day out of nowhere. Whereas in this case, the prophets are characters in this story. They were first established in the very first episode of this entire series. They are very much a part of this show. And this was character development for them. And they would never be the same after this. This is the first time where they make the decision, which any good storytelling involves the characters making a decision, and the prophets, who are important established characters in this show, make the decision that actually we are going to be hands-on with the Bajorans because we are of Bajor and we do not want the Cisco to die. Basically, we don't want the game to end, is what they say. And so this isn't a Deus Ex Machina. This is established characters making a choice. And I love the setup to get to this because we are led to believe that Rom and Kira are going to succeed, and they don't. So now it's up to the prophets. And I love that whole sequence with Cisco talking to the prophets. So I completely disagree that this is a Deus Ex Machina. I think it is an amazing scene. I think it is a phenomenal ending. And then seeing Starfleet get back on the station, everybody cheer, is very satisfying. Also, meanwhile, I forgot to mention Odo. It's his love for Kira that ultimately turns him. And I think he has a line to Kira, something like, it's hard to explain, but I think you already know why. Now, they wouldn't actually get together until later in the season, but his love for her has already been established, and it's built up nicely till we get to the point where they do actually get together, even though I fucking hate the Vic Fontaine episodes. But I have always loved this relationship because it's been very well developed. So that was good. Now let's talk about the demise of Gul Dukat and the incredible acting of Mark Alamo. I mean, that's what makes this number 11, really. I mean, everything I just said makes it number 11, but this really puts it over the top. Just kind of see him lose his mind before your eyes. I think there's been some mixed reviews on Dukat's losing his mind storyline. I've always loved it because it makes so much sense. Because this is a guy who kind of always has been delusional. He always has this, belief that he is this hero, and that have you not seen one statue of me on Bajor? Like, he truly believes that there should be a statue for him. I mean, he always has been a little bit delusional. So the progression of his losing his sanity is very logical and makes a lot of sense, and is very well established, and it makes perfect sense that the thing that would put him over the top would be the death of Zial, which interestingly comes at the hands of Damar. Damar is such an interesting character. Of course, I talked about him back in number 20, but that was a 7th season episode. This is a little earlier on in his development. He already hates Ryun at this point, but he is still on the side of the Dominion because he wants to do what's right for Cardassia, and he heard Zial confess to helping the prisoners escape, and in his mind, that's what's right for Cardassia, and kills her. And it is so devastating because we love Zial. We've come to really care for this character. She was there with Quark helping our heroes escape. She's one of the good guys, and her relationship with Gul Dukat, her father, has always been really complicated. So it's so heartbreaking for us to see her die, but the Mark Alamo's performance of just him completely losing his mind, and he was already kind of built up before that. He was kind of like, no, but where are they? They should be coming any second now. We were so close. We won. And just to see him go from there to completely losing his mind when Zial is killed Many chef kisses. Many chef kisses for Mark Elamo's performance in this episode. Magnifique. Both of these episodes favor the bold and sacrifice of angels, but especially sacrifice of angels. Very nearly knocking on that door of the top 10. Does not quite sneak into that top 10. But number 11 is nothing to be sad about in my top 100 of Star Trek. And that is where we are. We are now knocking on the doorstep of my top 10, which will begin in September with my numbers 10 through 6. That will be followed up by the top 5 each having their own separate video, numbers 5 and 4 having their own separate videos in October, number 3 and 2 in November, and number 1 in December. So next up, we're in the top 10 in September. Super excited for this. So I hope you will join me. I hope you will subscribe if you have not already. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. We're getting close. This has been really exciting for me, truly. All right, everybody. I will see you all really soon. Goodbye.